Well, while we collect the questions that are there, Lauren, I just was hoping that you would expand a little bit on what I most like about the book, which is the fact that you took a headmistress, a teacher, as your central figure. This is a workshop on class structure in Buffalo, which is strong and persists, but it's also the city of good neighbors. It allowed you to get into every corner of the city and every region in the city. I'm particularly interested, of course, in her friendship with Mary Talbert as you fictionalize it. But could you talk a little bit more about what Louisa allowed you to do?
Well, thank you for focusing on that. I really felt, when I first got the idea for the book, as I said, sitting there on the shores of the Delaware Park Lake, um, the demons that haunt me, and I think probably haunt all fiction writers, they really came onto me about who would narrate the novel. How are you going to enter a city with so much going on, with so many issues at play in every part of society, and tell that story without creating chaos? And then I did have this insight that an educator, a headmistress, has access to every part of society and access to the upper classes because in Louisa Barrett's school, the Macaulay School, the city fathers send all their daughters to be educated with Miss Barrett. Um, she has scholarship students, but she can also enter every part of the community. Now, one reason she could do this at this time, and this is somewhat a complex issue, that because she was a professional woman, she, in a sense, lost her sexuality. It's something that she had to give up. This was an era when married women were not permitted to be teachers. If a woman married, she had to quit her job as a teacher. And this was straight through, I think I believe I have this right, that one of the presidents of Wellesley College actually had to quit her job as a college president because she wanted to get married. So these women were supposed to be asexual. And that brought a certain invisibility, which I think allowed Louisa to maneuver more in the city. And she understood and exploited these things to gain more power for herself. The fact that the city fathers felt comfortable around her, the fact that she could go into every part of the city, that she did have a certain invisibility because of the role that she played. I allowed her to tell that story and take possession of these things that could be negatives in her life. She harnessed them into things that were powerful for her, or sources of her power.
And Mary Talbert, would you talk about how you drew her into the story?
Well,
Pretty dramatic.
when I was growing up, I knew nothing about Mary Talbert, and this is a terrible commentary on how the city for so long suppressed its own history, and particularly how it suppressed the role of women and suppressed the role of people of color. She is a national figure, Mary Talbert, and deserves that kind of recognition. I felt it was important to include her after I discovered her. And, when I write a novel, I want to create complicated characters who are not all 100% good, and nor are they all 100% evil. I want them to be real people who react with one another in a realistic way. And so the debate that Louisa and Mary Talbert have to go back and forth on, and Mary, of course, is angry that Louisa won't step forward more to help in the cause that Mary is fighting. Louisa feels trapped and hopes for greater understanding from Mary. That felt so true to me when I thought about it. And it was, I mean, you know, a large part of writing fiction, at least for me, is an intuitive process. So you get the world in motion, and then the characters, they have to think and react for themselves and have these debates among themselves. So in a way, I set out for them to do what they do and say the things they say, but sometimes they do and say things that are completely unexpected to me, and I just have to go with it. It's part of the magic of that process. And so I can't always explain, by way of apology, in a way that I can't explain in rational words how some of these things came about, because they just grow out of the process itself.
Well, I would think that dynamic is a particularly powerful one. And I only recently came to know about it. It's very proximate to us. Mary Talbert's house was just up Michigan Avenue, right by the Nash House. It's been destroyed since then. You cut across when you become familiar with the architecture of Buffalo. You cut across to the areas that Louise was traversing every single day. It makes it very close. And our UB colleague, Lillian Williams, is working on that.
Oh, that's wonderful news.
Yes, you should know that. And if you haven't had a chance to go visit the Buffalo History Museum recently, Mary Talbert figures significantly in a wonderful portrait of her there. And then there's a temporary exhibit brought to the present day of the uncrowned queens of Buffalo.
Oh, I haven't been to the museum recently, so we should all go over there soon.
Yes, it's very recent. It won't be up forever. It will be up into the summer, I believe. But a bunch of us went over to a breakfast that was offered because of the exhibit, and Lillian was honored there, and the interest in Mary Talbert is really strong. So part of your own sense of renewal and optimism about the city can potentially be reinforced through that.
Wonderful.
Let me ask also, because we have the program director of the Roycroft campus with us as part of this program, if you could just remind the people here of how you drew that into your plot, which I thought was so illuminating and clever, and again, moving for the question of women.
Well, I knew that I wanted to include the Roycrofters. You know, my mother is an artist, and we often went to East Aurora, toured the Roycroft exhibits there. I wanted to bring that out. As I read about Albert Hubbard in my research, though, he became an increasingly complex figure for me. You're a very wealthy man who turns against the source of his wealth. He had an unusual personal life, shall we say, in that he was married to the sister of the man who owned the Larkin Soap Company, the source of his wealth. So he divorced her and married a woman not unlike Louisa Barrett in certain ways. And they started that press together and so many other workshops. And it struck me that I could show him in all his complexity, and that he was the type of person who would provide a refuge for someone who was in trouble, who might be an outcast, that he had, a wonderful heart. And he was also a showman. I mean, people are complicated. There are many, many layers to all of us. And I hope I was able to show some of that for him.
Arts and crafts and commerce. And again, as so often is the case of these rapidly growing cities, you have a little rustic retreat close enough for a quick train ride. And the children go down there. But that's an extraordinary community in its philosophy. So I think that was a wonderful way to, again, spread the region out and get us to see that. Well, I think everybody responded with tremendous enthusiasm and optimism to what you had to say today. So let me ask a couple of the questions we got from the audience. When I read, said one of our audience members, your phrase about the energy of possibility that lives have here, I was struck because I've used that exact word, possibility, to talk about our experience. do you think that this just runs in the veins of great city and its inhabitants?
Well, that's an interesting way to think about it. Um, yes, but Buffalo didn't always have that sense. And certainly when I was a girl in the 60s and 70s, this was a very sad city in a lot of ways. And I say that very sadly. I grew up with a wonderful group of young women, and none of us live here anymore. Well, one or two do that I've gotten to know since I grew up are here, and I do have wonderful friends here now. But it was sad at that time that so many of my close friends felt that we had to leave the city. And, it still makes me sad to think about. And now when I come back, and naturally I only see a small section of the city, but I just sense, um, cafes opening and people on the street and a different approach to life, which is that sense of possibility of a great city. But I also think these things can be cyclical. And I hope that we continue on this forward path that has started now. And I think reuniting the city when that highway is covered is going to be a really important step in that direction.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of us that work to keep our children here, and they stay.
Well, that's wonderful news. That's inspiring.
Yeah, I think I've been around long enough to be in the grandparent position. And it makes me pretty enthusiastic. The 30-somethings in the city are really remarkable. I belong to an organization that's replanting those trees, for example, because what a sore point. And alas, a continuing sore point with the ice storms that we have.
I've actually heard that a lot of people are moving from Brooklyn to Buffalo because of the great housing stock and the jobs, and they're bringing their talents as young people and the things that they want to this city, and that's fantastic for the future too.
I have a feeling that I know the origins of this particular question because two colleagues who are joining us from the Philadelphia area are part of an NEH summer seminar to work with high school teachers on how to teach the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt is a phrase that we're all familiar with, but you can also think, obviously, about the Great Lakes, the greatest freshwater resource that we have on the planet. You can think about the Six Nations and how they transcend national boundaries here in the United States and Canada. Our geography is fascinating to think about. So the question is, what is the role of fiction, of storytelling, in providing paths forward for Rust Belt cities like Buffalo? Do you view fiction as an agent of hope and motivation?
I think fiction can be an agent of hope and motivation. I like to think that this novel is exactly that. I think that, as I said before, fiction is able to show, as I think very few arts can, in a deeply personal way, the interaction between the individual and society. Because fiction can show thoughts and emotions and feelings as people go out into the world and face the world and the society that they live in. And that's certainly something that I work toward in my fiction. Of course, every novelist is different. And I wish more novelists would look at cities. Of course, Tom Wolfe, for example, looked at New York, but through the lens of satire. And I do think there's a role for fiction in terms of showing what cities are and how they bring people together and how people from all walks of life cross paths in a city and what a wonderful thing that is. And you can choose characters. I mean, there's so many students here and young writers. You pick characters from all walks of society, bring them together. That's what a city is. And show what happens when they finally have these opportunities to interact with one another.
Now, I know that your writing career has continued strongly, and that one of the reasons you can't stay with us too long is because your latest novel is going into paperback right now. But you have a lot of fans here. And so I think this will be the final question. One of the audience members asks that there was talk of a TV show based on City of Light.
Oh,
Is that at
well, that's
all likely to
interesting
happen?
because I never heard that talk. but I
Is there an agent out there?
but I wish I had, because it's a great idea. City of Light was optioned a few times to become a film, a feature film. But nothing ever came of those options because it used to be said that people weren't interested in films or TV shows about the past. But now, recently, that's really come around, and really now is the time. So if any of you have contacts in Hollywood, now is the time. It's perfect.
Lauren, thank you so much from all of us, and we'll get you out there, and you can get a chance to talk with people as well.
Yes, I'm happy to talk to everyone who comes up to see me outside.
And those of us who are staying around for the weekend will also be out there for a bit. If you wanted to talk with any of us about the workshop, or again about the second keynote, which will take place right in this auditorium at 7 o'clock tonight. I have some little handouts of inexpensive places around here that you can grab a bite in between and come back and join us. Thank you very much for coming out.